Namaskar, and welcome to the Indologia podcast, where we journey through the pages of history, politics, and dharma. In each episode, I read to you excerpts from important books that offer insights into the Bharatiya civilization. And the book that I am going to read you from today is a book called Invaders and Infidels, which is written by Sandeep Balakrishna. Many of you will know him as the founder of Dharma Dispatch. He's an excellent writer and a historian. And Invaders and Infidels is a fantastic book for those of you who want a very quick rundown on Indian history around the period of the early Islamic invasions. So if you are interested in the Itihas of Bharatvarsh, I would highly recommend you buy this book. And now, I will read you an excerpt from this excellent book. Sandeep writes, "The civilizational cost of misplaced magnanimity. Until the Mughals, none of the Muslim dynasties in India had regimes outlasting the prestige, power, and magnitude achieved under its greatest emperor. And a significant reason for this lies in the manner in which succession was decided in the Islamic system of statecraft. As long as the Sultan was ruling and alive, he permitted no one, not even his own sons, to wield even a semblance of political decisiveness. Succession was chiefly decided either on the Sultan's deathbed or when he had irreversibly declined in physical or mental faculties. Or in most typical cases, succession was decided purely on the Sultan's whim. Even so, when the successor ascended the throne, there was no guarantee of loyalty or stability, or his life itself. It was a savage tribal system where the most ruthless of them took it all and kept it with him as long as he was alive. Even a veneer of challenge to his absolute despotism would be quelled mercilessly. Mahmud of Ghazni is himself the most representative specimen of this system. The manner in which he usurped the throne at Ghazni presents an early and classic case. With a shrewd behind-the-scenes alliance with his other brother, Abul Muzaffar, he had deposed his younger brother, Ismail, who had been anointed as the successor by Sabukhtigin. One of the most incisive and brilliant commentaries on this primitive tribal system of succession notes, "The sultans never divided the succession of the kingdom, nor did they designate a successor. All sons were groomed to rule, but only one could take the throne. A method that seemed brutally designed to ensure the survival of the fittest. Most startling of all, they paid no attention to succession through marriage. Where emperors in other nations went to exhaustive lengths to secure dynastic marriages and legitimate succession through approved bloodlines, the sultans hardly bothered. A sultan's father would naturally be the previous sultan, but his mother might be a concubine or a slave, possibly not a born Muslim, and from one of a dozen subject peoples. From one perspective, it can be said that the entire history of the medieval Muslim dynasties of India is just one sweeping kaleidoscope of violent and incessant palace intrigues, brutal fratricides and patricides, and interminable rebellions solely aimed at capturing despotic imperial power. The contrast with the great Hindu dynasties from the ancient times cannot be more pronounced. Barring a handful of exceptions, dynastic succession was generally smooth and vetted and accepted by everyone in accordance with the tenets of both Raj Dharma and Kshatriya Dharma. Hindu political philosophy lays great emphasis on the personal character and conduct of the ruler who was most of all anxious about the acceptance of his suzerainty by the majority of, if not the entire citizenry. This in turn emerges from the same political philosophy which ordains that the king should always strive to earn the goodwill and the affection of his subjects. It also enjoins the people to overthrow any king who concentrates absolute power in himself. The earliest example of this precept in action is the fabled account of Chanakya, who deposed Dhananand and installed Chandragupta Maurya, a brave and capable youth of humble origins, on the throne of the Magad Empire. This inbuilt quality of bloodless succession can most notably be seen in the vast dharmic empires of the Mauryas, Shatavahanas, Guptas, Pallavas, Vaktakas, Cholas, Chalukyas, Palas, Gurjar Pratiharas, Hoysalas, Rashtrakutas, Parmars, and the grand Vijayanagar dynasties, roughly spanning an awe-inspiring period of more than a millennium. Against the vast canvas of the history of human political organization, this prolonged and unbroken record of India holds a high distinction as one of the unparalleled examples of entirely homegrown political genius. The same innate quality also ensured extraordinary durability, stability, and unbroken continuity of these empires. It was also a great catalyst that tempered unruly passions, motivated by inordinate political ambition in the larger political climate. These core civilizational elements, among others, are what both the grand works of Hindu art, architecture, and sculpture, most of which have an inherently meditative quality. Growing up under the looming banyan shadow of Mahmud of Ghazni obviously had a deleterious and weakening impact on his son and successor, Masud I. In just 7 years after Mahmud's death, the Seljuk Turks under the leadership of Tugril overwhelmed and sacked Ghazni itself. By 1040, Masud I abandoned almost all of his western territories to the Seljuks and fled to India. In the same year, his own army revolted against him and installed his brother, Muhammad, on the throne. Muhammad wasted no time in imprisoning and then executing him. After Muhammad's death, the remnants of the Ghaznavid Empire were ruled by a series of weak and worthless kings, only in name. By 1115, the mighty empire of Mahmud of Ghazni had been reduced to the feeble status of a vassal and a protectorate of the Seljuk Turks. Even this did not last long. In 1141, the Central Asian marauder Gur Khan of the Karakhitai Turkish stock devastated the Seljuks beyond recovery. Two new powers emerged from the ashes of this devastation: the Khwarizm Shahs and the Ghurids, also known as Ghors and Gurs. Both feasted on the carcass of the Ghaznavid Empire, and the latter sowed the seeds of the first Muslim empire in mainland India. The rise of the chiefs of Ghor is one of the eccentric accidents of history, given their unspecific origins in the remote, treacherous, and inaccessible region of central Afghanistan. For scores of centuries, it had been the perfect location for Buddhist monks who had made it their home to live a life of secluded contemplation inside its caves. The Muslim chroniclers Al-Istakhri and Ibn Hawqal record that when Mahmud of Ghazni invaded Ghor in 1011, it was still a country of infidels, containing only a few Muslims, and the inhabitants spoke a language different from that of Khorasan. In remaining true to his religious piety, Mahmud converted a significant portion of its population to Islam. He also left behind the ulema or the Islamic clergy to fully instruct the Ghors or Ghurids about the glories of Islam. Yet, the infidels were stubborn, and the extension of Islam and its cultural institutions and the conversion of Ghor took a long time. As late as the end of the 10th century, the population of Ghor was for the most part heathen. According to Al-Istakhri, it was the biggest pagan enclave within the borders of Islam. More than a century after Mahmud's death, two Ghurid brothers emerged after being freed from the dreary confines of a prison in a fortress in Waziristan. Their ancestors had been Buddhists, but they had no generational memory of it. Around 1160-1161, they had been thrown into prison by their own uncle, the world burner, the self-styled Sultan Alauddin Hussain, who had marched against Bahram Shah, one of Mahmud of Ghazni's last descendants, and sacked and burnt the city of Ghazni to the last atom, except the grand mausoleum erected in the honor of Mahmud. What was the crime of the two brothers? After this world burner had sacked Ghazni, he had appointed them at the head of a province called Sunja, and with their newfound power, the brothers quickly began raiding the neighboring territories without their uncle's permission. The enraged uncle sent a contingent against them and flung them into the aforementioned prison. However, after Alauddin Hussein's death in 1116, his son Saif al-Din Muhammad freed his cousins. And then, in just 2 years, fortune lavished a generous smile upon them. In 1163, Saif died in a battle against the Oghuz Turks. His elder cousin, the older of the two pardoned brothers, Ghiyath al-Din Muhammad, ascended the throne of Gaur. Ghiyath-ud-Din Muhammad's younger brother was Shihabuddin Muhammad, alias Muzzuddin Muhammad bin Sam, infamously etched in the Indian historical consciousness as Muhammad of Ghori, who ultimately won the history-altering battle because his formidable enemy, Prithviraj Chauhan, had lost sight of the civilizational cost of the generosity he had shown to this perfidious foe. There was a fundamental reason his world-burner uncle Alauddin Hussain had spared the tomb of Mahmud of Ghazni. Mahmud, through his pious deeds, had stamped his position in the Muslim world as the hero and role model of every Muslim soldier and aspiring conqueror. Entirely consistent with this tradition, Muhammad of Ghori too said an earnest prayer to Mahmud of Ghazni, the pioneering Ghazi who had paved the way to plunder Hind and plant the victorious flag of the faith in this land of idolaters and untold wealth, beseeching him to give him the strength to emulate his exploits. By the time Muhammad of Ghori had turned in the direction of mainland India, the situation had dramatically altered from the time of Mahmud of Ghazni. The political configuration had witnessed sweeping changes, and the Hindus had recouped and renewed their strength. And Muhammad would learn repeatedly and at an enormous cost that he was no match for them. When he marched in the direction of Gujarat in 1178, a series of disastrous humiliations was waiting for him around every corner. That year marked roughly 540 years of successive and repeated attempts by the Islamic armies of the Arabs and the Turks to establish even a foothold in the heartland of India and implant the message of the only true faith here. So far, they had succeeded only in occupying the frontier areas of Kabul, Zabul, the northwest frontier province, Multan, and parts of Punjab and Sindh. Muhammad of Ghori was vastly inferior to his more daring predecessors in valor, striking power, and military acumen, in spite of the fact that he now possessed a distinct advantage that Mahmud of Ghazni hadn't: a fairly detailed knowledge of India, its geography, roots, cities, political setup, and culture, as well as the Hindu religion and society. Al-Biruni's India and Burhanuddin's Al-Hidayah, apart from numerous oral accounts by contemporary Muslim chroniclers, supplied this much-needed knowledge. However, in his hasty zeal to emulate his more illustrious predecessor Mahmud, he had forgotten to study, remember, or learn valuable lessons from Mahmud's greatest failure on his victorious return journey to Ghazni via the Sindh desert. Muhammad of Ghori was impatiently salivating at the prospect of replicating the pious performance of Mahmud in Somnath with greater success and effectiveness. The glowing accounts of Somnath's devastation, recorded so colourfully by Muslim chroniclers, and the high status that Mahmud had earned in the eye of the Caliph, had fueled Muhammad's fantasies of an easy conquest. What he had also overlooked was the fact that a full 150 years had elapsed in the interim. Gujarat was now more powerful than before, but impatient and incredibly thirsty with ambition, Muhammad marched against the dictates of geography with a large army, taking the route of the treacherous Thar Desert in western Rajasthan. However, when he reached the foothills of Mount Abu with a famished and exhausted army, he found that his massive force was thoroughly unprepared for what he faced: a determined army of infidels led by a mere boy, the eventual Chalukya king Mulraj II. His mother, Queen Naiki Devi, pitched the boy in this battle against the reviled Turushkas leading from the front. At Gadarghatta, the armies of the Mohammedans were defeated with great slaughter, and Muhammad himself managed to escape after suffering many hardships in their retreat to Ghazni. It was a mortal blow to Muhammad's confidence when he surveyed the battered ruins of his surviving army. For the next 12 years, he did not lead a single expedition against any Hindu ruler. The victory against the Turushkas was deservedly celebrated in the annals of Gujarat's historical memory by an impressive array of poets and in inscriptions of the era. An inscription by Bhimdev II reads, "Even a woman could defeat the Amir." during the reign of Mulraj II. When Muhammad of Ghori led the expedition after 12 years, he was routed even more severely, notwithstanding the fact that he had amassed greater resources and territories in the interim. During the same interval, Muhammad had raided and taken Peshawar in 1178, Sialkot in 1185, and Lahore in 1186. With the capture of these three key cities, Punjab was now under the sway of Muhammad. Almost. He was now knocking at the borders of the kingdom of the mighty Chauhans, Prithviraj III of Ajmer. Prithviraj III was still a minor when he was coronated to the throne of Ajaymeru or Ajmer. His mother, Queen Karpur Devi, ruled as the regent and vastly improved and beautified Ajmer with parks and gardens and wells. It enjoyed enviable prosperity. In 1178, Prithviraj took full control of the kingdom and eventually began a series of expeditions and consolidations that made the Chauhan Empire a formidable force, stretching across Rajasthan, parts of Gujarat, Delhi, Bundelkhand and Gadwala kingdom centered in Kannauj. However, almost immediately after taking charge, he was confronted with danger in the form of the selfsame Muhammad of Ghori, who was en route to his disastrous campaign against Gujarat. Muhammad had learnt that Prithviraj had an inveterate hatred towards the Turushkas, who had ravaged and desecrated the sacred land of Bharatvarsha on countless occasions without reason. In a bid at making an opportunistic alliance, Muhammad sent a diplomatic mission to Prithviraj, which failed miserably. Enraged, Muhammad decided to provoke him. At Kiradu, near Badmer, he plundered and vandalized the Someshwara temple and captured Nadol, which was the capital of a branch of the Chauhan bloodline. As anticipated, an inflamed Prithviraj resolved to punish Muhammad, but was stopped by the wise counsel of Kadambavasa. Give Muhammad a long rope. Let him exhaust himself, and then we'll see what to do next. Kadambavasa was proven right. Soon a messenger arrived at his court from Gujarat with good news. The boy Mulraj II had pounded Muhammad. Prithviraj lavished gifts on the messenger and on his wise minister. At any rate, by the time Muhammad of Ghori had returned after the 12-year-long hiatus, Prithviraj Chauhan's empire encompassed a vast swathe of territory, up to Hisar and Sirhind in the northwest, Delhi in the north, Mewar as the southern border, Bayana, Gwalior and Gadwala in the east. While he had inherited most of these, he had acquired a few on his own. Emboldened by these important victories at Peshawar, Sialkot and Lahore, Muhammad almost immediately launched a series of destructive raids into some minor territories of Prithviraj Chauhan. When he found success, his confidence was restored. He would no longer face the same humiliation that he had suffered in Gujarat. On the contrary, Muhammad was now set to conquer all of Hindustan. He led a large force, stormed and captured the fortress of Sirhind right inside Prithviraj's territory. He appointed Malik Ziauddin as its in charge and appointed 1,200 horsemen to hold it for 8 months. He said he had to return to Ghazni on some urgent work. The impetuous capture of Sirhind was a direct taunt to Prithviraj, who either took it rather lightly or wasn't fully updated about the danger this posed. His feudatories didn't. A few weeks later, Chandraraj visited the Chauhan at Ajmer in person with this report. The beef-eating Malech, Shiauddin, has pillaged and burnt most of our cities, defiled our women, and has reduced them to a miserable plight. There is scarcely a mountain-pent valley in which his brutal tyranny has not suffocated the noblest of Rajputs who have fled here for protection from him. Scores of these noble Rajput families have disappeared before him, and he has now established his capital at Multan. He is an unrelenting enemy. Chandraraj was the son of Govindaraj, the governor of Delhi and trusted vassal of Prithviraj. He was accompanied by other feudatories. When Prithviraj heard this shocking report, he decided that it was time to punish Muhammad. Accordingly, he set out at the head of a massive force of 2 lakh horsemen and 3,000 elephants. Muhammad, still in Sirhind, was taken completely by surprise at Prithviraj's swiftness. He abandoned his travel plans and quickly pulled up his troops. In 1191, the foes met at the historic site of Tarain, just 80 miles from Delhi. From the beginning, it was an uneven battle, and it didn't take long for Prithviraj to outflank, outnumber and shatter Muhammad's army. Its right and left wings broke apart under the Chauhan's onslaught, and its central division too quickly began losing numbers and courage. However, still intoxicated with the successful capture of the Sirhind fort, Muhammad was blissfully oblivious to this frontal disaster, occurring right before his own eyes, and refused to heed his informant's advice to retreat. Instead, he chose to rush in where angels feared to tread. Unsheathing his sword, he charged forward against the superior enemy. When Govindraj spotted this, he rushed at him with extraordinary speed, seated on his battle-trained elephant. However, Muhammad was quick to react and threw a spear at Govindraj. Undaunted, Govindraj returned the favour by hurling a javelin with such force that it caused a pothole-like wound in Muhammad's arm, the blood gushing out like a fountain. The impact of Govindraj's deadly projectile threw Muhammad off his horse, the agony of the fresh wound so unbearable that he could no longer hold the reins. Just as he was falling, a trusted foot soldiers of the Khalji Turkish stock sprang with lightning speed to his rescue, hauled him on a horse, and clasping Muhammad to his bosom, sped away to safety. But for this great fortune, Muhammad would have bled to death on the battlefield. However, the battle was far from over. Minhaj-us-Siraj narrates what happened next. He says, "When the Muslims lost sight of the Sultan, a panic fell upon them. They fled and halted not until they were safe from the pursuit of the victors. A party of nobles and youths of Ghor had seen and recognized their leader with that lion-hearted Khilji, and when he came up, they drew together, and forming a kind of litter with broken lances, they bore him to the halting place. The hearts of the troops were consoled by his appearance, and the Mohammedan faith gathered new strength in his life. He collected the scattered forces and retreated to the territories of Islam, leaving Qazi Tolak in the fort of Sirhind. Prithviraj's victorious troops pursued Muhammad for 40 miles before returning. Now it was left to the hapless Malik Ziauddin alias Qazi Tolak to defend himself all alone at the Sirhind fort. He surrendered after a prolonged siege lasting 13 months. Prithviraj Chauhan had wrestled back the control of Punjab. Meanwhile, at Ghor, the twice humiliated Muhammad was busy inflicting his fury on the officers and nobles who had abandoned him at Tarain. He rounded them up in full public view, gathered the mouth bags of their own respective horses, filled them with raw barley, slung these weighty bags around their necks, and made them walk around the city, forcing them at sword point to eat the raw barley grains like brutes. Then he threw them all in prison as punishment for this stain on their character. Then he also made a solemn vow to himself. "Since the time of my defeat in Hindustan, I have never slumbered in ease or waked, but in sorrow and anxiety. I have therefore determined, with this army, to recover my lost honor from those idolaters, or die in the attempt." By the next year, Muhammad marched to the same terrain with a massive force of 120,000 armoured horsemen, drawn from an assortment of Turks, Afghans and Khokars. He arrived at Tarain via Peshawar, Multan and Lahore. From Lahore, he sent a message to Prithviraj at Ajmer through his emissary, Rukhnuddin Hamza. "Embrace the true Mohammedan faith and acknowledge my supremacy. Your refusal to do so will be treated as a declaration of war." Prithviraj Chauhan called his bluff and sent his reply in the language it deserved. He said, "To the bravery of our soldiers we believe you are no stranger, and to our great superiority in numbers which daily increases, your eyes bear witness. You will repent in time of the rash resolution you have taken, and we shall permit you to retreat in safety. But if you have determined to brave your destiny, we have sworn by our gods to advance upon you with our rank-breaking elephants, our plain-trampling horses, and bloodthirsty soldiers, early in the morning to crush the army which your ambition has led to ruin." Unlike the previous year, Muhammad of Ghori replaced bravado with perfidy and lulled Prithviraj into a false sense of peace by claiming that he had come to make truce, according to the orders of his elder brother, Ghiyath al-Din Muhammad. Prithviraj naively believed him and lowered his guard. In the opaque wall of darkness, before the next fateful morning of 1192, Muhammad of Ghori rudely, unexpectedly sprung the second battle of Tarain. Muhammad of Ghori won it through sheer treachery, not valor. Prithviraj Chauhan was beheaded and died, perhaps without realizing the civilizational cost of his misplaced magnanimity. The respected historian and first-rate scholar D.C. Ganguly presents a pithy but melancholic analysis of this cost. He says, Prithviraj was evidently a general of high order, but he lacked political foresight. It was a grave defect with the Indian chiefs that in their fight with the Muslims they always chose to be on the defensive. The result was that their adversaries, even when they were defeated, could escape annihilation if they could only withdraw from the battlefield. Prithviraj was not free from this drawback. At this time, the rule of the Maliks of Ghors was not firmly established in the Punjab. Prithviraj ought to have pursued the disabled Sultan after his victory in the first battle of Tarain and made an attempt to root out the Muslim rule there. The defeat of Prithviraj in the second battle of Tarain not only destroyed the imperial power of the Chauhans, but also brought disaster on the whole of Hindustan. The morale of the ruling princes and the people completely broke down, and the entire country was seized with panic. The civilizational significance of the Battle of Tarain is also couched in another profound facet. Tarain is just about 25 kilometers from Kurukshetra, the grand theatre of the Mahabharat war, where Dharma had triumphed over Adharma. The last Hindu emperor of Bharatvarsha had died, and with him, her independence. The decisive victory of Muhammad of Ghori was also the harbinger of several permanent firsts in India. It marks the first episode of forced and panicked mass migration of Hindus, Jains, and other native non-Muslim populations from various parts of northern and western India towards the central and southern regions. One of the more enduring and durable features of Hindu social life since time immemorial was the remarkable continuity and attachment they had towards their immediate geographical surroundings. Muhammad's perfidious victory shattered that sense of permanence and continuity forever. From then onwards, this age-old stability and settled generational rhythm of life would repeatedly be smashed for the next 500 years throughout northern, eastern and western India by the same forces of religious zealotry and iconoclasm that motivated Muhammad bin Qasim, Mahmud of Ghazni, and now Muhammad of Ghori. The other tragic precedent that ensued in the wake of Muhammad's victory was that for the first time Hindus in mainland India got a new identity, which would continue till the collapse of the Mughal Empire. Zimmi or Dhimmi. The later-day Sufi saint Amir Khusro delineates the full pious import of the term. He says, "Happy Hindustan, the splendor of religion, where the law finds perfect honor and security. The whole country, by means of the sword of our holy warriors, has become like a forest denuded of its thorns by fire. Islam is triumphant. Idolatry is subdued. Had not the law granted exemption from death by the payment of poll tax, the very name of Hind, root and branch, would have been extinguished." Flushed with the decisive victory over Prithviraj Chauhan, Muhammad marched into Ajmer, captured it, slaughtered thousands of its inhabitants who had dared to oppose him, and reserved the rest for slavery. Scores of idol temples were demolished, and the famous Sanskrit college of Vigraharaj IV was converted into a mosque. Hasan Nizami, the Persian historian, wrote, he says, "The victorious army on the right and on the left departed towards Ajmer. When the crow-faced Hindus began to sound their white shells on the backs of the elephants, you would have said that a river of pitch was flowing impetuously down the face of a mountain of blue. The army of Islam was completely victorious, and 100,000 groveling Hindus swiftly departed to the fire of hell. He destroyed at Ajmer the pillars and foundations of the idol temples and built in their stead mosques and colleges, and the precepts of Islam and the customs of the law were divulged and established." Next, Muhammad marched to Delhi and inflicted a similar horror on the Rai, who had dared to invite the dread of Muhammad's punishment. A torrent of blood flowed on the battle, but the badly outnumbered Hindu governor had to eventually surrender and placed his head upon the line of slavery. The conquest of Hindustan, at least in his mind, was now complete. and he finally set out for Ghazni. But Muhammad would not live long to peacefully enjoy the spoils of his rampage and plunder. In less than 10 years, his empire on the other side of Hindustan was fast imploding. His old foes, the Khwarezmians, had snatched even Herat from the Ghurids. In 1202, his elder brother, Gyathul-Din, died, and Muhammad became the Sultan of the Ghurid Empire. In 1204, he himself suffered a massive defeat at Andakut at the hands of the self-same Khwarezmians, led by Muhammad II, from which he never recovered. It was a degrading personal humiliation more than an actual military defeat. Hopelessly cornered, his life was spared only after he paid a hefty ransom to the accursed upstart. This incident had predictable consequences. In less than a year, revolts erupted like wildfire across his dominions in northwestern India. The Khokhars and numerous other unnamed tribes blazed across the region, reaching Multan and captured its governor. Next, they plundered Lahore itself and shut the road between Lahore and Ghazni. The work of Muhammad's entire life was coming apart before his own eyes, like the threads of a fine royal garment. And yet, he was hopelessly desperate to stitch them back and personally marched to the newly usurped region, and in a vicious battle that lasted 5 months between the Jhelum and the Chenab rivers, he finally defeated and slaughtered the Khokhars with extraordinary cruelty. He reoccupied Lahore on 25th of February 1206 and headed back to Ghazni. 18 days later, when he was sleeping in his tent at night at a place called the Myak at the bank of the Vedic Sindhu river, 2 Khokhar avengers barged in and without hesitation sheathed their daggers in the king's body, which was afterwards found to have been pierced by no fewer than 22 wounds. Muhammad's body was carried to Ghazni and buried there. Muhammad of Ghori did not have a son and successor. The Ghurid dynasty was extinguished. However, what he had left behind in Hindustan in the aftermath of his devastating incursions proved far more enduring. Instead of leaving behind a son, he had left behind a pack of slaves. Before departing to Ghazni in 1192-1193, Muhammad of Ghori had stationed one of his favorite slaves, who originally hailed from Turkestan at Indraprasth, about 10 miles from Delhi. His name was Qutubuddin Aibak, and he had long since been elevated to the rank of a general. Aibak had been vested with the command of a good chunk of Muhammad's army and appointed as the chief in charge of all territories conquered by Muhammad in Hindustan. On 26th of June 1206, 4 safe months after Muhammad's brutal end, Qutubuddin Aibak assumed the supreme power at Lahore. With it, the first Turkish Muslim Sultanate was established in Hindustan, and for the first time in the history of India's ancient civilization, the seeds were sown for the concentration of absolute despotic political power that had the unstinted backing of an Islamic clergy, which in turn derived its authority from scripture. This was a political phenomena India had never witnessed before, and which would irreversibly alter the destiny of this ancient civilization for the worse. The classical age, which had disappeared forever in the previous century, would now be replaced by a form of oppressive imperial barbarism which would find again scriptural justification for its oppression. It is a legacy whose vestiges continue till date. And that was the excerpt from Invaders and Infidels, written by Sri Sandeep Balakrishna. If you're interested in the history of invaders and the infidels who opposed them, I would highly recommend that you pick up this book. It's a wonderful read. I hope you liked this episode of the Indology podcast. If you did, then please give me a 5-star rating on Spotify, Apple, or wherever else you are listening to this podcast on. You should also follow me on the social medias. The name is the same everywhere on Twitter, Instagram, Telegram, WhatsApp. It's Indologia, Indologia. Until the next time I see you, Jai Hind, Vande Mataram.